And we're back, gentlemen. Good afternoon. Happy Sabbath. It's good to see you, fellas.
Yes, yes, yes. Good afternoon, everyone. How y'all doing?
Hey,
That's right.
doing all
Happy
right.
Sabbath. Happy Sabbath. Happy Sabbath. Good to see my colleagues back here at another pastor's round table. Hey, listen, y'all. This is the last Sabbath of August. Time is going by so
Oh, wow.
quick.
Going by quick.
It's going
Hey,
by quick.
I got to do something right off the top before I really should have said hello to you guys before I say anything to the audience. Listen, my mother, Pauline Paul, had her 88th birthday on yesterday. So I got to send a shout out. Happy birthday, Mom. I don't know if you're watching right now, but just want you to know we love you. And we are so honored and blessed that God has given you another year of life. So praise the Lord for that.
Yeah, we're
Listen, Sister
we're
Paul,
excited for you. Yes.
Sister Paul used to be my AY leader back at the Mount Sinai
Ah,
Church.
that's
And
right.
we did,
That's right.
Pastor Paul, we did something called street preaching, man. She had us out there
Mercy.
doing street preaching.
Mm.
So I just love Sister Paul in a special way. Happy birthday, Sister Paul. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Sister Paul. I'm new to the family, but I just want to say that it's always, when I first met you in person, you put such a smile on. It has stayed with me, and it felt like I was just grafted in. So happy birthday, Mom.
That's awesome. That's
Good
awesome.
stuff.
Listen, guys, man, let's let's see who's with us today. Let's go through here. I see Mama Patrick is with us as always. Good to have you, moms. Joining us from again the beautiful Spice Islands, Trinidad and Tobago. Glad to have
That's
her
right.
with us. Who else do we have with us, guys?
Listen, we have here Curleen St. Clair is here with us. Faithful member of the Pastor Roundtable. Sandra Holder saying happy birthday to Sister Paul. She is on here today. So we have some people on here just excited. Tiffany Brissett is in the house. Philly in the house.
Good stuff. There's Roycelyn joining us as usual from the beautiful state of Maryland. Who else do we have? Monique Francois joining us. Not sure from where, but good to have you. Ooh, we have Antigua with us. Anybody wants to take a shot at that name?
Where are we? I'm trying to look to see where Antigua is.
I see Tangela's walking in the real space. She says it's Tangela from New Hope. She wants to come and say, "Hey, you guys know I'm shooting from come a little closer. You got to come all the way in.
They got to say hello. We want to see. We want to see.
All the way, a little bit more. There she is.
That was my Pathfinder president up there, right there.
Oh, Pathfinder president. You must be talking about Pastor Wade.
Passed away.
Hey. Good to see you. Good to see you.
Nice to see you today. All right.
Philly is in the house. Tiffany says Barbados is in the house today. Sandra Holder. Good stuff. I see Myrna Harris from the good old Bronx, New York. Awesome. Well, listen, Dr. Henry, here we go. This is the time that you're just getting in, that folk need to do something. What is it, Dr. Henry?
Listen, today, right now, at this time, share, and share. You want to make sure you continue just to share this feed. We have a great program on today, and the only way that your friends and family members and those that you've befriended on your social media feed, the only way they're going to be able to see this feed is if you share it. So please share it.
There we go. Monique says, "Hey, I'm checking in from London." I said I didn't know quite where. She makes it clear she's joining us from London today. So glad to have the international audience with us today. All right, gentlemen, let's very quickly. Oh, go ahead, Doc.
No, I was going to say, Pastor Wade, Pastor Paul, last week.
Oh yeah, my. That's where I was going. Yeah, that's exactly where I was going. Whoo! Listen, if you missed last week, oh my goodness.
You missed it. If you missed it, you missed it.
No. If you missed it, you're in luck, actually. If you missed it last week, you can go back and check out the YouTube channel or on the Facebook page. But that discussion last week, how long is too long?
How long?
Mercy. My goodness. Dr. Charles Tapp, Andy, Pastor Andy from the Florida Hospital Church, pastor 37 and a half years. And
that's
then
right.
Henry Wright. It was just a phenomenal conversation. That again, if you missed it last week, we want to invite you to go back. I was getting calls and texts as soon as we finished that show from pastors all over the country, from lay persons all over the country. Just saying we need more of this. We want to hear more about this conversation. They were just so enamored by how real the conversation was that those individuals that we had as our guests, that they just brought it, and they talked about some relevant things that impact how we do ministry, and that's kind of how we landed where we are today.
But
Okay,
you
that's
know,
right.
interestingly enough, last week's discussion wasn't just about the pastor; it was about the pastor's family, and
Right.
so everybody was able to get something. I've heard some from pastors who talked about what they heard helped them to be able to deal with the issues they're dealing with in terms of moves and how to talk to
Hmm.
presidents, how to. So it was a great discussion on last week.
Yeah.
And listen,
I got
Pastor
it.
Wade, I like the fact that we had different perspectives as far as seeing this from a different vantage point. We had all of them were pastors definitely at one time, but we had a sitting conference president that was
Hmm.
Right.
talking about this issue, and was really transparent. We had a retired pastor that has been in one church for like 37 years that was able to
Wow.
give input on this. And then we also had a retired pastor, administrator, and also we had a professor,
Hmm.
Dr. Henry Wright, that gave us a perspective on this. So it was a well-balanced show. And that's one of those shows that, gentlemen, we just have to do a part two. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just, that's just,
Yeah.
and if you're an
I
administrator, you got to go back and watch it. Go ahead,
yeah.
Pastor Mo.
And listen, I got a text from somebody said it was balanced, but not quite balanced enough, because they said it was a female pastor who texted me
Okay.
and said that we missed the question about how do moves affect female pastors. Is there a difference in how we do moves? How does that affect a pastor who is also a mother and a wife? And I thought
Mm.
that was a very good perspective that we did miss, and that I look forward to being able to deal with or to address in a future conversation. So ladies, we're
Mhm.
thinking about you as well, and we want to come
Yes.
back and address some of that as well. So good stuff. Good stuff.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So listen, today we want to continue, hopefully scratching where it's itching. In our conversation last week, we talked about the point that there is a shortage of pastors. Some of us may
Yes.
not realize that, but there is a shortage of pastors. Maybe because you see your pastor every Sabbath, you don't realize it. But when you look at it from a large perspective, when you look at it from the top down, there is a shortage of pastors. When I came through Oakwood University or Oakwood College at the time, we had about 100 and plus theologs or theology
Theologians,
majors
theology
coming
students. Mhm.
through each
Yeah.
graduation. I think at the last graduation, how many graduated? I want to say there was only about 90. If,
Wow.
if, if, if I may be giving it too much, but there has been a complete reduction in the number of theology majors in the school, whereas the school has made recruiting pastors to come, or recruiting students to become pastors, a priority there at Oakwood University. So that's something new. And so in that discussion, in that vein, we wanted to talk to some pastors. This is what's on the table today. We wanted to talk to some pastors. We entitled the show, I Don't Pastor Anymore.
Yeah.
And we'll get into it in the discussion, what that really, how to unpack that. But we want to talk to some pastors. We don't want to just say, well, we have a shortage of pastors. We thought we would talk to pastors who don't pastor anymore, and
Right.
try
Hey,
to get an understanding of what made that choice, what help them to make that choice of not pastoring anymore.
right. Raj, let's even work on putting a little bit more perspective on it. One of the things that we've heard is that in the years ahead of us, that we will be retiring more
Mm,
pastors than we are graduating.
correct.
And that suggests that shortage of pastors is right around the corner, that we will be retiring more pastors than we are graduating from our schools. And so that kind of speaks to, this expectation that there will soon be a shortage of pastors in the field. And while on top of that statistic or that idea, we've also got pastors who are leaving. And so that has raised some concern in the hires up. So not only are we graduating, or are we retiring more than we are graduating, but we also have pastors last week. I think President Tapp said pastors are saying we got options. And so we said, hey, let's talk to some guys who had some options.
Today,
and let's
I was
see.
about to say that.
I
So
think the
today
North
we're
American,
talking to some guys who have some options.
North American Division Ministerial, I think, shared that there will be a need for 1,500 pastors.
Whoa!
In about a year or two, there'll be a need for 1,500 pastors, and we are in nowhere near seeing that being graduated. And that's across the board. That's not just in one or two conferences. That's across the board. 1,500 pastors needed.
Wow.
So today, we have some gifted people at the table today, Pastor Wade and Pastor Paul. They were one time in pastoral ministry, did a phenomenal job, and now they're doing something else. They're not pastoring anymore, but they're still in ministry. So we have here Robert Davis, my classmate there, Pastor Davis, the evangelist. He has baptized. Man, listen, you were on pace, Doc. You were going to catch up with Cleveland, man.
But hey, he still got time. He still got time.
Yeah, so that's Pastor Davis, man, my friend there in ministry. And we have him here on the table here, Dr. Davis. And then, listen, we got another powerhouse right here, Kymone Hinds. You talk about creativity. You talk about doing things exceptionally well in pastoral ministry, when he was in pastoral ministry. You talk about him being a youth director, Central State Conference, and we go on with all of his accolades. Gifted young man. He is here. And we are just privileged to have my friend as well, Pastor Kymone Hinds, Dr. Kymone Hinds, the Kymone Hinds. He's here too with us today.
Yes, all right. Hey, well, let's bring him on, Raj. Let's introduce him to the saints. There they are, in the flesh, in the spirit. Greetings, gentlemen. It is an honor for us to have you at the table today. I think, we have the best gig in the world, gentlemen, when we get some of the brightest and best of throughout the Adventist world, throughout the world, right here at the table. And we are just honored today to have these two gentlemen. They are colleagues, but more than that, they are friends. And we are just excited to have both of you at the table today. We're going to have a word of prayer, and then we're going to give each of you just a few moments to just greet the audience today. Dr. Henry, we're going to ask if you would just offer a quick word of prayer, and then we will jump in.
Let's pray. Father, we are so privileged to have these great men of God that's on our podcast today, God. You have blessed them in their ministry. You're blessing them now in their new ministry. We ask, God, that as we have this conversation today, it will be fruitful. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right, gentlemen, you know the drill at this point. We don't always have your full bios and resumes and everything to read to everybody, but we do want to give you an opportunity to just say hello to the audience. Just let them know exactly where you are, what you're doing, or anything else that you want to say during that time. We give full-time employed pastors about 37.9 seconds because we know what preachers do. I'm trying to figure out if we still have to shoot. Now I know Robert Davis, I'm gonna have to give him 15.7 seconds because he's gonna take whatever he wants to anyway. But listen, we'll start with Kymone and go to Rob. Anything you want to share with the saints today? The time is yours, sir.
Well, thank you, Pastor Wade, Pastor Paul, Dr. Henry, for having me on, having myself and Dr. Davis on. I think this is a great conversation. It's one that I think our church needs to listen to. It may be uncomfortable for us, but I think it's one we can learn from. And so thank you all for having me on. My parents are on watching this now. I saw them in the comments. Hey. I'm excited about that. And just for us to discuss this. So thank you all. And I'm glad to be here with my youth director, Pastor Wade.
All right. Dr. Davis, the time is yours, my friend.
Okay, I thought that we was going to give a little bio about ourselves, so I got my spiel ready and narrowed down to about 25 seconds. But anyway, I wear two hats. As I have an LLC called Unbox to Lead. In that capacity, I am the CEO. And what we do is we provide a leaders peer support community for executive directors and C-suite officers. It's a comprehensive community to help them to reach their personal and professional goals, as well as to provide emotional support for leaders as they lead the organizations. The second hat that I wear is that I also have a nonprofit which is called Unboxed. And what we do right now is we are the project coordinators for the largest policing and public safety policy creation and policy advocacy task force in the entire nation. And so I'm working here out of the city of Denver, having the time of my life. And
Wow.
I'm so glad that you invited me to come and to join you. Did I keep that down to 45 seconds, 35, somewhere around the time?
You did good, Preach. You did good. You did good. Well, see, you've
Wow.
grown since we've been together last, man. That's
Yeah, I
awesome.
mean, listen, guys, we are just so excited to have you with us. And let me just say right off the top, we appreciated your
Yes.
ministry. I know that it has shifted. We're going to talk about that. But you came up in the work. You came up through school. We saw you in school. We heard you got picked up. We were high fiving. We were excited to be in ministry. We partnered in many ministry outings. You at your local church, you came, preached at many of our churches, our youth congresses, all those things. But what issues did you consider in making the decision to leave pastoral ministry? I'm going to ask Dr. Davis, share with us what were some of the issues that made you consider to make that decision to leave pastoral ministry?
Listen, I'm probably gonna be the most boring guest that you've had on here because there really weren't any issues that I considered. To be honest with you, what I mean by that is um, the decision to transition from congregational leadership to community leadership um, was made. I remember the exact day. It was the first Sunday in August, 2015. I was graduating from Andrews with my Doctor of Ministry. My wife and I were driving back to Chicago, and we took the scenic route through all of the orchards and stuff in between Michigan, Indiana, and Chicago. And there was just a calm that came over me, and the Lord told me He was ready for me to transition from congregational leadership, and I really didn't know what that was about. At the time, I was pastoring in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and was literally having one of the uh, most successful and phenomenal runs of my entire ministry. We had just started a community health center. And it was called the Berean Wellness and Community Support Center. We had just started that, got our 501c3, we're up and going. And the Lord says, man, He's ready for me to transition. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know if that meant that I was going to transition from denominational employment. Was He transitioning me into some administrative position or transitioning me into um, um, teaching or faculty? And He closed all those doors. He closed the door to conference administration. He closed the door to becoming a faculty member or teaching. And the only door that was open was for me to go out into the community. Being stubborn and hard headed, I should have left in 2015. I would have put my family in a much better financial situation had I done it then. My wife had established a powerful business in Baton Rouge, where she was kind of had almost cornered the market as it relate to telepractice for speech pathologists. But I had to go ahead and I see one of my former members, Dorian Franklin, is here. Hey, hey! So she knows that I'm telling half the truth, not all the truth, but half the truth. But my wife was really cornering the market. But because of my lack of faith, I
Mm.
could not see myself transitioning and how is that going to look and all of this stuff. So I ended up taking a call up to Denver. Love it here, but it was not what God initially intended. And then finally he said, listen, dude, when are you going to get the point? I'm ready for you to make that transition and to retire from denominational employment, congregational leadership, and to move into the new area of leadership that I'm calling you towards. And so You can only fight for so long. I talked with my president a year and a half, Roger Bernard. I talked to him a year and a half before I transitioned out. He gave me the green light. He said, "All right, you can tell your church 6 months before you leave." And that was our plan. And so 6 months, which would have been June of 2019. So I told them in January of 2019 that, hey, you got 6 more months of me. Get the most out of me because I'm going to be transitioning out. And as they say, man, the rest is history.
Mm.
Wow, fascinating,
Wow.
fascinating.
But it wasn't. I just want to say the last thing I promise. It really wasn't where I had a fallout with the conference, where my church and I wasn't getting along. The brethren weren't, didn't sit, was had moved me somewhere I didn't want to go. It really wasn't that. I remember when Kymone and I had our first conversation about that. We both were kind of surprised. I remember where I was, Kymone, when we had this conversation. I was outside of the Ministerial Alliance meeting here in Denver, and I was sitting in my car talking to you. We three-wayed in past the Brooks. You remember that?
I remember
And
that.
I was shocked. I was like, "Oh, Kymone is transitioning, and I'm transitioning." So I was expecting him to tell me about how the brethren had kicked him in the gut, and how they, how he, if he never saw another Adventist church, it'd be the best thing that happened. And he was like, "No, God's called me to do something different." And I was like, "Are you
Wow,
serious? That's my story."
Yeah.
Mm. Mm.
wow, fascinating.
Yeah. Sounds like Rob kind of alluded to my answer already. And I think it's similar, right? So about a year before I made the announcement that I was leaving, and maybe I should even go back further. In all of my ministry, um, God blessed, had a great time. I enjoyed my experience pastoring, being a youth director, being a church planter. But there were times along the way that I knew that this was not what God wanted me to do for the rest of my life.
Mm,
Um, and I think my wife as well felt the same thing. But as Dr. Davis said earlier, there's a question, right, that I was asking: what do I do? What's next? And I think about a year before we made the move, before we actually made the announcement, that's when God really like made the confirmation. No, I want you to move and step out into this world of working for yourself, starting a business, empowering other people to take their knowledge, their passions, and develop them into businesses themselves. And then we began working on a plan. And I think so I want to add something to what Pastor Davis is saying. Were there times along the way that ministry was difficult or challenging? Absolutely,
Mhm.
right? Like
Yeah,
let's just be honest. I think there were challenges, there were difficulties, and I think sometimes God even uses some of those to stir you up so you don't get comfortable in something that He doesn't
wow.
want you to stay in. But let me be clear. I just as confident as I was in 2000 when I felt called to go into pastoral ministry is as confident as I am about what happened in 2018 when I stepped away
Hmm.
from pastoral ministry. I felt just as called both times in making those moves.
Wow.
yes.
Wow.
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 Good.
Wow. Wow. I want to go back a little bit. And again, we look back at your pastoral career, and again, phenomenal work from both of you gentlemen. And as you mentioned, that Kymone Hinds, you mentioned that there were times, and I think all of us has experienced, or most of us have experienced those times when it was difficult, in
Hmm.
pastoral ministry. So my question is, at those difficult moments, did the denomination have an impact in your decision to stay in pastoral ministry when it was difficult, or did the denomination have like a negative impact and kind of because some people get hurt, in the denomination. So did the denomination have a negative impact in your ability to make that decision to stay when those times got rough? I want to go to Pastor Hinds first.
It's a good question. There's a question I wanted to ask when I came on here. So I think it's related to what you just asked me, and I'm going to put it out there and then answer your question. I think whenever people like myself or Dr. Davis or others leave, we ask, "Why did you leave?" And I think it's almost as good a question to ask pastors who are still in ministry, "Why did you stay?"
Okay.
Ah, wow.
Because sometimes I think
Good.
we
Good.
we overlook people's reasons for staying, and I think sometimes if we look at reasons why people stay, those aren't always noble, right? We think it's because of the call. I think
Sure.
sometimes some of the reasons that some people have stayed as long as they have because of finances. I need the money. I need to check, and I can't figure out
Yeah.
something else.
It's the money,
Um,
it's the status, it's the power, it's position. It's yeah.
well, let
Sure.
me say this, Pastor Paul. I'm not telling you. I'm telling you this from my experience, and I'm also telling you all this because I don't know if this has happened with you, Dr. Davis. Because I left, other pastors who are still pastoring feel a lot more comfortable to tell me about their feelings of wanting to leave. Right? Like, hey, man, listen, I'm gonna tell you this. This is what I'm feeling, and two big reasons that I've heard some people stay who want to leave are money. I can't provide for my family. We have these bills. I got all of the loans and all of this stuff, and my family and kids are in school, and I need the subsidy. So it's money. And then the second one is it's almost scary. The second one is a feeling or a fear that once I get into this calling, to step away from it is some sort of sin or just
Yeah.
if you put your hand to the plow and you step away, it's not worthy. There's a lot of, I think, this is Kymone Hinds, bad theology around what it means to be in denominational employment. It almost feels like once you get in, you can't leave until death do you part, and I think that's a
Right.
wrong concept. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me
Like a
answer your question. I
soldier.
know I was off there. I was off totally.
No,
But my
but
answer to that
no. Go ahead.
is
Yeah. Yeah.
the denomination. I'm just like any organization. I mean, I don't perfectly like anything in any organization. And there are some things along the way that I felt like, stirred up the nest of this isn't what I want to do for the rest of my life. Do I wish I was paid more? Absolutely. But for all of the demands of the job, do I wish there was more understanding from administration at times as to the present reality of ministry? Because a lot of times the conversations that administrators have about what ministry is not the reality of what's happening on the ground presently. So some of those
Wow.
things are contributing factors, and I think those things need to be addressed because people, those expectations on pastoring, both from members and from administration, can be very much a stressor to the job and the role of a pastor.
That's good
Wow.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
As you were talking about the call, I think there's a question about that later. Paul has a question next, but I remember, you go in. I fought it for 10 years. I was like, nah, I don't want to be a pastor. It's not. My youth director, rest his soul, Danny Davis, was very, you need to be a pastor. I'm like, nah, that's not for me. But this sense of joining this fraternity, sometimes for life, is a hard yoke to break. You talked about the fact that y'all actually heard the voice of God saying, "Hey, I need you to do something else." Um, I mean, what were there some things that said, "Nah, don't do it now," or what was it that really how did you make that switch? Because it's really tough for a pastor to, this is what I know. Some of us come into this thing from 18 on, so we really don't know what life has for us. But what is it that helps us to make that jump to saying, hey, I'm gonna try something else in ministry? Because Doc Davis, you said you are now a community leader and community pastor. Where did that thinking begin in terms of, because we're not told that when we come into the church to pastor a local church.
For me, it was with Pastor Dr. John D. Aaron in Alexandria, Louisiana. He's a Baptist. He's deceased now. He was a Baptist pastor, and he took me underneath his wing. And one of the things he told me is he was driving me around to meet the various city officials. And I'll never forget, we had just left the sheriff's office. And I watched this man tell the sheriff what he was going to do. Sheriff, you're going to do X, Y, and Z. And I saw the sheriff telling him, yes, sir. And as we're driving
Wow.
around afterwards, he says to me, he says, Robert, never forget, you don't pastor a church, you pastor the city.
Come on now.
And that stuck with me. And that was in
Yeah.
2003 that he told me that. And that has stuck with me ever since. And so my ministry approach has always been, and there's some of my former members who are on this, who are watching this right now. my approach has always been extremely engaged with the community. And so it was easy for me to be able to see that there was a need in the community for the skill set that I had and that I had developed through my academic training, but even more so than that, that I had developed through congregational leadership. And so when you recognize, man, every city that I go to, everywhere that I'm going, I'm having the exact same experiences and successes and being able to move the community and lead the community in a very strategic direction, then that fear kind of subsides and you realize, man, if I was to, and I thank Pastor Hinds for this, if I was to attempt to monetize this and to try to make a living off of this, then I could turn this idea to life. How you like that one, Kymone?
You unboxed that very well, but Dr. Dave, you unboxed that very well. You know,
These guys.
but just to add to what Pastor David said, I think a lot of us, if we're honest, fear holds us doing what we're presently doing, right? And that's pastor, that's anyone in any position, right? Like let's just talk about human fear of transition, of the unknown, of stepping out and doing something different. We all face those fears. And I think as a pastor and someone who preaches faith, God challenged me, man. You're preaching this. I remember preaching a series at the beginning of 2018 for my church, and I still have the picture. It says, "It's time to move." And I'm preaching for them to make a move in how they're doing stuff. And I say to them, it is dangerous to stay in the familiar when God is calling you to live by faith.
Mercy.
And it hit me. I'm not preaching to these people. God
My
is
Lord.
talking to me
Wow.
because what was obedience for me stepping into full-time pastoral ministry would have been disobedience if I had stayed doing it when I knew that God was telling me to leave.
Wow. Wow. Okay. All right. So that leads us, I think, a good segue into it's really a continuation of the previous question. So let's back up and to think about what a lot of young people think about before they engage a course of study of theology. And they think about the pastor. Oftentimes, the caricature of the pastor for a lot of people isn't as much that he is the pastor as much as it is he is the preacher, right? Because it's in the preaching moment that the most presence is often felt. People feel, they know you as the guy who stands in the desk and lights it on fire, preaches the word, right? Um, so a lot of times the call to ministry for a lot of young people, they see themselves as answering the call to preach as opposed to the call to pastor. And I don't know if that was particularly clear. Pastoring involves
No,
a
that's
whole
great.
lot more than just the preaching part. So when you guys engaged your call, and we've talked about this word a number of times now, this calling, and people say that, you can choose your job, but you cannot choose your calling. Um, so, in the calling, did you guys feel when you answered that call, was it a feeling that this was a call to preach or a call to pastor? And at the time that you received the call, and it's going to be a two-part question. At the time that you received the call, did you feel like this was a lifetime calling when you first accepted that calling on your life? And if it changed, then and you've talked about it a little bit, but talk us through if that was in fact the case, and then if it was, then where did the shift come? Because if it wasn't for a lifetime, I mean, you're not in the pulpit right now. I know that was a long and
Yeah.
combobulated question, but
Yeah.
take a
You
stab
want to
at
go?
it.
So if I look at my journey and I'm trying to remember the beginning of the call, I felt called to lead. I felt called to lead God's people. My journey is being a person growing up in church, actively involved. Before I went off to school to study to get into ministry, I was actively involved in my local church. actively involved with youth ministry. Pastor Wade knows that he was one of my youth directors, and actively involved. And it became a moment where, okay, I'm gonna keep doing this stuff on the side while I'm have my job, because my first career is something called actuarial science. So this is not my first shift. This is my second one.
Okay.
Um, but the call, I remember it, to lead my peers, people in my age group, to lead youth, because that was my demographic that I was working with my local church. So that was my call then, and so I pursued that call then. And it's interesting, 2 years into pastoring, going in to be a youth director. But it
Mm.
just, I'll say this. I believe, for me, the call of God is progressive. Like, it's the same God who leads you to one spot, keeps going, right? So I'm glad you guys phrased it this way. I never left ministry. I left denominational employment, but I've
Uh-huh.
Hmm.
never left ministry. Dr. Davis, you listen to him talk, he's never left ministry. And for a lot of the pastors I know who are stepping away from denominational employment, what is interesting to me is that the thing that they are doing in their new career, in their new move, in the calling, that they're following the calling, is very related to what they were doing in ministry. It's just God
Hmm.
saying, now move that into the marketplace, move this into a new arena. And I think that's amazing, because it means that what the work that was being done on one level is getting out into the world. So I guess that's my answer for that. I hope I answered the long question in a good way.
And I want to say this, Anselm, because you just threw out something. I served for 5 years on the ordination committee between Southwest region and here, where I'm currently at in Central States. And I would intentionally ask the same question, which is, how did you know that God called you to pastoral leadership? That was the question I would ask when my turn came around. And only one person answered it. Every single person of about maybe 20 people that were ordained in that 5 year period, maybe a little bit more, but they would all say, I just had this burning desire to preach. And
Wow.
only one person actually gave an articulate answer as to why they believe that they were called to congregational leadership. And I believe that may be a reason why people are fighting so hard to get out of congregational leadership and to get
Mm.
into the conference office and to get into other areas because, you know, that was not necessarily their push from the beginning. And so, if I could do it all again, if I could go back and talk to the 18-year-old Robert Davis who got into congregational leadership because he wanted to tell the world about this amazing person he met named Jesus,
Hmm.
I would tell him pastoral leadership is really one of the least effective ways for your personality type to accomplish that.
Wow.
Wow.
But what happened was when I announced, Dion, at Oakwood, and you were there, that, hey, God has called me to do ministry, there was all of these mechanisms within the system that said, okay, you want to tell people about Jesus, you want to help, you want to make changes in people's lives, we got just the thing for you. We want, you're going to not only study theology, but you're going to be prepared to become an employee of a regional conference. We're going to train you to become an employee of a regional conference, and everything you do is going to be prepared to stand in a pulpit once a week to deliver a message on Sabbath morning, a sermonette on Wednesday evening, and to lead
Wow.
board and
Wow.
business meetings and to organize the church to do periodic outreach
Wow.
activities. And that was literally the least effective use of the gifts and the personality that God had given me. And I
Mm-hmm.
thank God for my experience in congregational leadership. But had I known then what I know now, I would not have studied theology because the degree is somewhat useless in the real practical world. I would have still went into ministry and telling folk about Christ, but in a completely different way. And unfortunately, we just don't have mechanisms in place to help people to identify, young men and young women to identify what it is that they want to do relative to ministry.
Wow.
Wow.
Listen, and I want you guys to I want the audience to know this. And all my years at Oakwood, um, I cannot think of a sermon on on Oakwood College campus that was more effective than the sermon, Robert, that you preach during a student week of prayer. I'm trying to remember that title used to be
Revelation
etched in my mind.
13, was it something like that?
Yeah, it was something in the lamb, the
The
beast,
look
or
of a
something
lamb,
like
the roar of a dragon. I remember
Yes,
that
the
message.
look of the
Thank you.
lamb and the roar of the dragon. There, in all those years, whether this was from a student or any other ordained pastor, conference employee, the, the the Holy Spirit used you to light the entire campus on fire after that sermon. So people would look at you, Robert, and say, as a result of how God used you there, not as a pastor, but as a preacher, then this man must be called by God to fit inside of that box that you just described. Um,
Dion Henry introduced me in that message. So Dion and I have been running these streets for a while. Yeah,
So,
I'll never forget that.
it's Dion's fault.
the look of the
Oh, Dion.
lamb,
Yeah, let's blame everything
roar of
on
the dragon.
Dion.
Yes.
Oh
So, so,
my,
so,
my,
so,
my.
so, so let's talk very quickly before we move to the expectations, right? So people sat around and they've heard both of you preach. Kymone, I heard your name. I knew your name. I knew
Yeah.
of you before I ever met you.
Yeah.
Um, and I knew of your creativity, your innovation, your passion for ministry and all of that. And then eventually when we got to talk, we talked because I already knew some stuff that I was already kind of this guy is on it. Um, so you guys also know, and forgive me if I'm skipping ahead. I'm not sure if I am or not, but coping with not only, I asked initially kind of your own expectations. Did you feel that this was a calling for life, or was it for a season? Um, but in making this switch or transition, how did you deal, or did you think at all about other people's expectations or thoughts about what you were preparing to do? Come on, and then Robert.
Good question. Other people's expectations, other people's thoughts, definitely. Because of my some of the way I'm wired as a pleaser is one of my issues. I definitely thought about that. I wanted, because just like I mentioned earlier, you get into ministry, you hear the messages, keep your hand to the plow, so when you get in, there is an expectation from colleagues, members, family, people. There's a esteem of ministry that you're supposed to
Mhm.
stay in. And I think that probably contributed to me wrestling with it longer than I should have in terms of making the move. Because maybe there's a unsaid some unsaid expectation that if you leave, you're almost leaving God, you're stepping away from spirituality. There's a lot of other things that come along with it. And I didn't want people to think that way about me. But after a while, as Davis mentioned, you got to go with what God is telling you. I'd rather please God and disappoint people than please people and disappoint God.
Yeah. Got it. Good
I'll
stuff.
never forget. Pastor Debelier Snell was passing through town. His flight got canceled, just happened to get canceled here, and I live around the corner from the airport. So he came and spent the night at my home, and I was sitting in the living room. He and I speaking, and I was trying to articulate. This is literally like with the month after I had just transitioned out. I was trying to articulate to him why I had transitioned out of congregational leadership, why I was retiring, and for some reason he just couldn't get it. And anyone who knows Pastor Snell knows that he's probably one of the most brilliant minds that you'll ever encounter. And he just couldn't get it. And I'll never forget, and talking about, how others would receive it. And I was very discouraged. My wife pulled me aside and told me, she said, quit trying to explain
Mhm.
what God is
Wow.
doing
That's
because
right.
other folk are not going to get it. Overheard the conversation. She just told me, she said, don't just quit trying to even explain it. And I realized that, but I wanted my friends, those who I love and those who I admire so much, to be able to understand and to celebrate with the same
Mhm.
intensity
Wow.
when I announced, hey, I'm getting ordained this summer. All the guys were like, finally, yay, and all, we all were excited. We all got ordained within a year of each other. Dion, I think, was 2 years ahead of us. We were all cheering each other on when our ordinations came up, and I wanted that same
Wow.
validation, and I
Wow.
didn't get
Wow.
it. I just
Mercy.
didn't get it. No one could understand it.
You know what? Can I just piggyback on what Dr. David just said? It's interesting that both of us are on here today because, as he mentioned, we both were talking about this around the same time, and I think that was God ordained because Davis, just as we were doing that, you said it. A lot of people didn't understand. A lot more people are doing it now, so it's not as strange. It's not as whatever the word is. But I think for me, having you and I going through the journey together was helpful for me. I don't know if it was the same for you.
Mm-hmm.
I,
I
I, I
don't know.
need I need I need to say this. I need to say this to both of you. I know both of you. We've worked together. We have friends and community. What you did actually prior to my coming into ministry and the years that I put in ministry, now I understand better than before, and I applaud you the courage y'all took to step out and still be in ministry. It's something that still baffles a lot of us who are still in, and probably baffle a lot of people who are out. Even some of the members, what are they thinking? Because they see that pastoring is just this one thing. Could you share a little bit about some of the successes you have had outside of the pastoral congregational leadership? Share with us how God is working in your life, doing some of the things you're doing now that is still ministry.
And I want to just be. I'm gonna let Kymone start off, but I just want to say this. I want to push back just for a moment because my wife is right next to me right now, and she's livid because we continue to equate denominational employment, pastoral, congregational leadership as ministry. By default, if that's ministry, we look at other areas as not being ministry. And then we are confused. And I was the greatest culprit before I made the transition of doing this. But then we wonder why our members, the members of the congregations we lead, don't view themselves as ministers,
Yeah, that's good.
and why
Mm,
they don't take up the ministry mantle is
Yeah,
because we have told our members that real ministry is when you are employed by a conference and you're getting paid. We don't want you to call yourself pastor. We got this whole thing where members are not allowed to be referred to as pastors. We got all of these other rules and regulations, this hierarchy. Members are, which is completely anti-biblical. Members are not allowed to administer the Lord's Supper. They're not allowed to baptize. They're not allowed to ordain or do any of these things because only the pastor can do that. And then we wonder why the members are saying to themselves, I'm not a
disengaged. Where they
real
disengaged.
minister, why they disengage.
Yeah.
And I was the number one culprit of that.
mm.
Hmm.
But that wasn't the question, so I was going to kick it back to Kymone about what he's doing. He's on side.
Now, look, Robert. That's one of those topics for me. I think that's a big part of the bigger issue. One is the bigger issue of when we say church, what do we mean? When we say
Mhm.
ministry, what we mean. And I know
Mhm.
people think words, we're just making a big deal of words. But if church is simply something we do for a couple hours on the weekend in a building, and ministry is just preaching and pastoring, then we have really created a
Yeah.
show, and we've created something where um, the prevailing message is sit there and watch and just don't get involved. But as Robert is saying, all of us are in ministry. Like every person typing in this chat needs to understand
Come on.
that
Come on now.
you
Yes.
Yes.
are
Yes.
in ministry, period.
Yes.
I don't care what job you have. In fact, you probably have more impact on people during the week than
Wow.
people who are paid pastors because you meet with people
Mercy.
every day. You're in full time ministry.
Mm.
My Lord.
All right. So, whoever said the question needs to say it again because Robert got me on a hot
I mean,
horse here.
I mean,
Go ahead,
This is,
Roger.
this is your chance to brag about the
what
great things that you're doing, Kymone.
yeah, what you're doing
Oh,
now,
my bad. Yeah, yeah.
because we seem to think about it being that one thing, but
Yeah.
what you're doing is still ministry. Share with us what are some of the
Right.
blessings that God has given.
Right. And again, yeah, good. So glad you said that because ministry isn't even defined as what people do inside of the building or inside of working with the congregation. So, what God has allowed me to do is to help people to take their knowledge, their expertise, and the things that they're passionate about and start businesses. I believe God's called me to the ministry of entrepreneurship because because I believe there are much more people who are sitting on ideas, sitting on things that God has given them, that when they step out and they use them, they actually make a greater impact on the world, and it helps them to produce income. And so, over the last few years, God has allowed me to work with adults to start businesses and teenagers to start businesses. Two of those teens happen to be my own daughters, and
Oh,
they've been
yes.
featured on national news and local news.
Amen.
And that's really, I believe, a continuation of what I've always been doing. I was always starting something. Go back to my teenage years in my ministry, I was always starting something. And so God said, let me take that and use that to get it out into the marketplace.
Awesome.
And
Wow.
Kymone,
Love it.
don't forget you took my daughter and helped her to start her bakery business
That's
as
nice.
well.
Yeah.
She attended his one of his summer programs, and it was remarkable just how Kymone is helping a young African American kids understand the principles of entrepreneurship and not waiting until they finish college, but what they're doing right now. And so I just applaud him because he has mentored and coached me to help me to build my brand. You know, the ministry part of it, I had pretty much down pat. But how do I articulate that to the community? How do I build a brand around it? And Kymone coached me, never charged me. So I did one little thing for him, which is get him a nonprofit started. But I
Yeah.
still think I'm in a deficit. So I'll pay you. Just hold on, man. I promise. But yeah, Kymone has been
Wow.
helping so many people. It's just been tremendous. And one
Yes.
of the things that I like about what I'm able to do right now is I'm actually able to reach out to people who are in marginalized communities, and I'm gonna specifically talk about the LGBTQ community, marginalized communities who either A, have had very poor experience with church, or B, just do not view themselves as religious. And so they distance themselves from religious organizations such as the church. And so now, in the position that I'm in, I am able to develop and to maintain friendships with people who would just normally, if they heard pastor or were invited to a church, would automatically say, that's not really my thing. The same way you would put up if I said, hey, listen, I want you to come to this multi-level marketing presentation that's taking place at the Ramada Inn this Thursday. You'd be like, man, that's really not my thing. I'm not in the multi-level marketing. But people in the community have that same approach to church because they think about it from a religious
Wow.
component.
Yeah.
And so having access to people at their most vulnerable times and being able to minister to them without having to encourage them to attend a religious service or
Mhm.
without trying to explain that you can be open with me even though I wear the title pastor is just, it is so liberating. And again, I'm not putting this down, I'm not putting anyone else down. It's just very liberating. Again, with my personality type and the way that I Robert Davis move.
That's good
Wow,
stuff.
wow, wow, wow.
Listen,
Listen,
everybody,
yeah.
we just want to thank those of you who are joined. We're going to take a quick break. So we're asking our guests not to go anywhere, but we're just going to do a quick reset and we're going to be right back with our guest. Um, wow, guys. Ah, so all right, so a couple of things. Number one, if you are just joining us in this conversation, Dr. Henry, talk to us. What do they need to do? We've got about half of the thing left, about 30 minutes left. What do we need them to
Right.
do right now? Right
Listen,
now.
share, like, subscribe. I think they can do all of it.
Yes.
think they can do all of it, but they got to share it. Pastor Paul, listening to these great men of God just talk about the shift and what the Lord is doing is inspiring. But when we get back on, we gotta see what's the next phase for the
Yeah.
next generation. I mean, I see some questions are coming in
Questions
on
in
the
the
chat.
chat. Yes.
And
Yeah.
we got to acknowledge some of these questions because although we love the ministry that's happening, we do also need to see some pastors in churches, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, 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 yeah.
we gotta
Well,
we gotta figure out
listen,
what we're gonna do.
I want to encourage our audience a couple of things before we get back to our guests and the topic. Pastors Roundtable, the Lord has blessed this ministry over these 2 years plus now that we have been doing this with, having some great guests and some phenomenal conversations. And we've been trying to grow that YouTube channel. We are like, what, 40 something people away from reaching that 1,000 subscribers. And that's a huge milestone that you can help. You can help us reach that. If you have not subscribed to the Pastors Roundtable YouTube channel, we want you to take some time right now. Go over to the Pastors Roundtable YouTube channel, hit that little subscribe button, hit that little thumbs up and that little bell. It's going to alert you to any time we put any extra content on that channel. We know many of you are probably watching on Facebook, and we appreciate the support that we have gotten so much over these past few years. We also want you to know that there's some more tangible ways that you can support this ministry of what we do. Roger, will you talk to us just a little bit about that?
Yeah, so if you go to our website, the prt.live, at the bottom of this page, you can go to support and you can share with us on Cash App, or you can share with us on PayPal, and you can give a donation and gift. You can make it monthly, you can make it yearly, you can one-time gift. If you like what we're doing, we want you to be a part of that. And the only way we can make that happen, to keep up the technology, to make sure that we have the right equipment and be able to do some of the things that we're doing, we need your support. We do get support from some of our sponsors, but we still need your support, because you're the ones that are really making this what it is. If you didn't come and listen, we would not have a show to do. So we want to ask you to join us. We want to ask you to join us, partner with us. Our Cash App is there. You can go to the website and connect and do it on the PayPal. If you don't want to do that, if you want to connect with us, we also want to share with you that we have some T-shirts, and you can actually get a T-shirt,
Hey,
$15 for the Pastors Roundtable. Just
wait a minute.
email us with the information, and we will be happy to get you one of the Pastors Roundtable T-shirts.
All right. So yeah, okay. We'll talk about. I don't even have one of those. Anyway, okay. All right.
Oh.
Y'all gonna get us in trouble trying to sell merch on the Sabbath.
Hey, donations,
Listen,
donations.
Dr.
Yeah,
Martin, I want to say, Dr. Martin, as many email addresses, Gmail accounts as you have, the answer is yes. You can double subscribe. You can triple subscribe. You can do what you need to do. But listen, this conversation today has been on fire. I've been seeing so many people who have been saying that how grateful they are for us to take the time to have this conversation. I've seen pastors, I've seen pastor spouses in the chat talking about this conversation. Again, right now, if somebody that you know needs to be a part of this conversation, now's the time, because we're getting ready to bring our guest back
yes,
on and to dig
yes.
deeper into the last half of this conversation.
We want to
So,
just let you know, towards the end we will give contact information for each of our guests, so you can gain more information on what they're doing and support them in what they're providing in terms of ministry.
all right. All
All
right.
right, let's go.
All right,
Let's
let's
go.
bring our guests back
Yes,
on.
sir. All right. Well, listen,
Wow.
thank you so
Boom.
much. I mean, you all have been pouring into us, telling us about your experience transitioning from pastoral ministry to other forms of ministry. And you've also given us some reasons, or both of you have given us a reason why the transition, and it's the calling. You know, God has called you from the pastoral ministry to another form of ministry, and you're making waves, you're impacting lives, impacting the community. There's a lot of questions on the chat. I want to ask a few questions here. First of all, okay, so we know that some people move from the pastoral ministry to other ministries because of the calling, right? What are some of the other reasons why people move from pastoral ministry that you can think of? And what do you think the contributing factors are why people move? So what are some of the other reasons why people move from pastoral ministry?
I'll let the
So
doctor
guys,
go first.
hold on. While you work
Dr.
on
Davis,
that answer,
because look, because Dr.
I,
Davis, there's a question from one of our
yeah,
professors, our professor that we
yeah.
had at our doctoral ministry program
Oh yeah,
that I
Dr. Allen.
know we have. Yeah, that you look up, we got to answer that question. So I'm trying to set it up now so we can
Well,
ease into that question.
listen, while you guys get those answers ready, I want to put something else out to our audience that they can work on while we're hearing this
Right.
answer. And this might be a little controversial, so this might be a little for the brave. But I'm curious. I know that we've got a lot of pastors who are watching. I wonder if it might not be interesting, because I would answer this. If there are any pastors out there who are watching, if you have ever at any point considered doing anything other than pastoral ministry in denominational employ, if you're willing, if that's been you, if you have considered it, if you're willing, put a one in the chat. I think our people would be interested to see this. I will put my one in the chat first if I had it up. I absolutely have.
Yeah.
Have considered, thought about it.
Oh yes.
If you are a denominational employee, pastoring, and you have considered and thought about something else, I think it'd be interesting to see how many of you have done that. And I'll pass that on to the guys that answer the question.
I love it. I love it. I think that's a good thing for our viewers and for everybody. I think I got a one too. I think maybe Roger, you
Yeah,
might
my
have a
one
one
is in
too.
there.
All right,
Roger
so
got two.
go ahead.
TJ, put a one in there for me.
So, Pastor Davis, tell us, man, what are some of
So
the other reasons why people? Go ahead.
the gentleman who followed me when I retired, who followed me to the church, he stood up when he announced that he was leaving, and he said point blank that I got a job that's going to be paying me at minimum 3 times what I'm getting paid to pastor. He said so. I mean, I was shocked that he actually said it to the church,
Wow.
but at least you have to applaud his honesty. He said, "Hey, I'm going to be making a minimum of 3 times what I'm making right now,
Oh my.
That's not
just
hard though.
walking in the door."
Not that hard to do, but
Yeah. So
Okay, so for financial
that's a factor
reasons.
right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
so
Go ahead.
so I think Dion, to answer your question, a few reasons. I think financially is definitely one. Think about the demands of pastors. You are strongly encouraged to put your children into an education system that you have to pay for. Um, you you're the first to give for any project that the church is doing, that your expenses, your thing, life is growing, and then your income is sort of capped. So that is definitely one of the factors that I think some pastors consider. I think there is a frustration, right? Let me try to explain this. Imagine you're doing a job, you're working as hard as you can, but you cannot control the outcomes of that job, right? So let me see if I can explain it this way. You're in a church, that church has not grown for 20 years. They bring you in, you are the latest superman or superwoman that they now say this church is going to grow. You preach as hard as you can, you visit, you do all of the stuff, and this church still stays at the same level. Well,
yeah.
any person, any human being wants to know that their work makes a difference. Any human
Wow,
being, I don't care
that's
what
good.
role it is.
That's good.
You want, when you walk away from your job, I did a good job and I see benefit from it. And I think there's a frustration for many in pastoral ministry that no matter how hard I work, there are expectations from the top, from the bottom. There's a lack of participation, as we talked about,
Resources.
right? Resources, so that I can work as hard, but I'm not seeing results. And then you show up at workers meeting, and you're almost shamed for not having the results that others may have. And so those are some of the factors that I think that go into why people say, you know what, I need to look at other options that are out here.
Wow.
My. I was going to say, Pastor Paul, we had a very good conversation last week with Pastor Tapp, Pastor McDonald, and Pastor Henry Wright, and they brought up this whole moving thing. And so
Oh
I'm
yeah.
thinking that maybe, if you've been at your church for 5 years, and as they mentioned last week, one pastor went on vacation, came back, and somebody said, y'all just got voted to move. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
I mean that That could
Yeah,
be
and it
discouraging
comes
too.
across, particularly as he mentioned, to a lot of our younger guys as a level of disrespect. Like
Yeah.
you didn't respect my work, you didn't respect my family, you didn't respect my church enough to be able to have a conversation with me or talk to me about this thing. And so you've got a lot of younger pastors who are saying, that's just so disrespectful, and I didn't sign up for that. So peace, I'm out. I'm going to go over and do something, in a different field.
Hmm.
I'm sorry, we weren't supposed to be answering these questions, Dr. Henry.
Well,
These are
I want to say this.
But
I
yeah,
think sometimes we are projecting onto leaders why we think that they're leaving. I have not experienced out of all the guys who I have spoke to, and my wife got to a place where she's like, "Don't even answer the phone anymore," because every time I got a telephone call, somebody was like, "Hey, I'm leaving. What do I need to do?" I'm like, "Man, what am I, the transition expert or something? The transition
yeah,
coach?" But I think
experience.
that we protect because I think typically guys who have those experiences just go from one conference to another. They go. I don't know how many of them are actually leaving congregational employment altogether. I'm sure there's one or two out there, but I don't think that. I think the majority of the guys who are leaving genuinely are experiencing a call. There's another thing. We've had some pastors who have been shown the door because of various reasons, and so have been asked to leave or forced to leave. But I think the majority of guys who leave on their own are doing so because of a sense of a deep calling that God is
That's
moving
good.
them in another area of leadership. And I know we want this.
um,
I know somehow we want this thing where, man, if we can just figure out what is the negative reason why people are leaving, then we can fix that negative reason. If the reason they're leaving is because we're moving them too quickly, or because the conference is not being more considerate of their families, or whatever it may be, then we can just put policies and practices in place to fix that, and that'll solve the problem. I think what is happening is people are realizing that there's just a lot of ways to do God's work. And let me
right.
just also share this. There are a lot of contexts and a lot of congregations where with a hired, and I would have never said this 10 years ago, but where the paid employed title pastor is really not necessary.
Mm.
I
Say
know
it
I know
again.
that's
One more time.
Hmm.
Go again.
Say
I know
that
that's,
again,
that's
preacher.
be anathema, but they're really because to some degree in some of these churches the pastor just provides a weekly, or not even weekly because they have multiple churches, provides a monthly high level religious entertainment production
Well,
Mm.
called
can
a
I push
sermon.
back a
Wow.
little bit
Wow.
on what you just
Wow.
said, Pastor Davis? I don't think I agree with you that God is calling people and people are responding to their calling and making the transition. I think God had been calling people in the past. And because of the way our system was set up and even the mindset of the past, think about it. People were staying in jobs for 30 years, retiring. That day is no longer like people are doing that. So I think
Right.
pastors are doing the same thing that people are doing. Okay, I feel a call to do something, and there is the the mindset now is I don't have to stay doing this to stay in God's will. Like I know that it's not true anymore. No matter how many times I may hear it from other places, I know that's not true. And I think if you were to sit down with older ministers just privately, some of them have had some of the same thoughts that Davis and I just shared on here. I
Hmm.
people would ask me, "Why did you leave?" And before I answer, I would ask, "Why did you stay? Have you ever thought about leaving? Have you ever felt like God had called you to leave?" And many said yes, but I couldn't.
Mm.
I could not. And I think that's still something we need to hear. We need to factor that in.
Okay, so let me throw this back in to both of you, and particularly Dr. Davis, and what you how you responded. So there's a certain number of pastors that I've personally heard from, and most of us have heard these stories where there are pastors who have left, not because of the moving, not because of the families, not because of those things, and not particularly because they felt that there was an external call or a call for them to leave the organization, but because they were trying to fulfill a calling that they felt they could accomplish within the context of denominational employment, but it did not fit within the box that denominational employment required of them or would allow. Is that
Mm.
something that you've seen, that you've heard, that you felt? How would you respond or address pastors that have those kinds of concerns that, yeah, I don't want to leave denominational. I want to be a pastor, but I want to be able to do this, but my church or my conference or my executive committee or my union or my division, whoever, that this doesn't fit within their understanding of what pastoral ministry should involve.
My limited personal experience is that I have heard that several times, but I've never actually. Oh no, one. I only know of one person who actually could articulate and follow through with that. I only know of one person, um, but I've heard that a lot. But I have not. That has not been really a big thing that I've seen where you can't. I mean, I love to do community stuff. So, like I said, when I was in Baton Rouge, we started the Berean Wellness and Community Support Center. We actually had a clinic that was providing services for low income families in the community. I was working with the Ministerial Alliance. I was, working on policing policies and things of that nature. Everything I love to do, I was doing it. We had a midnight basketball league going on at the church and all kinds of other stuff. So, you know, I just don't know what it is
Yeah,
that they're looking for. It hasn't been my experience.
Okay.
yeah. Well, maybe I can provide another side of this because I hear what you're saying, Dr. Davis. I think what you shared is the things that you were doing as a part of your church ministry. And I think sometimes what pastors may be looking for are outlets that they have ownership over and they have some
Mm,
autonomy in to be able to do. I'm looking at the three gentlemen here who are interviewing us, and I'm going to say that the fact that you all have this platform is a great opportunity. Yeah, 'cause this is not run by your conference. This is not run by whoever your hiring organization, but it gives you an outlet and an opportunity to use your gifts and your talents. And I think in pastoral ministry, one of the things that we've talked about, and we may have different views on this whole moonlighting, being able to pursue other things. I think we're going to have to reconsider that because pastors
wow.
will, I think, one, pastors who are presently in ministry who are looking for autonomy and opportunities to have ownership over things that they are passionate about. I believe the institution is going to have to think about that tent maker ministry a little bit more. And then one of the answers for us not saying that we need more pastors may be allowing people who have skills for
Mhm.
leadership in the congregation to keep some of their full-time work and do this as well. But I want to just double click on that point. I think it may be helpful for conferences to recognize if I give pastors an outlet for things they're passionate about, it's not going to rob their ministry. It's actually going to give them that fulfillment we talked about and make them a better minister. And that's my personal belief as to one of the solutions that we may find to the issue.
And I
Mhm.
think if a pastor is doing his job, I guess the biggest way to articulate what you're saying, Kymone, is just mind your business, man. And that's just leadership 101. Leadership 101 is getting out of the way of your team. When your team is doing a good job, get out of the way of your team. I had on my broadcast Beth Yoe of the Conflict Center here in Denver this past week, and that's one of the things that she really talked about was knowing how to just let your people do what they do. And I think sometimes we have a tendency in administration to micromanage. If you really want your people to do well, if they, as long as they're doing their job and are successful, get out the way and let them do what they do.
Mhm.
I think the point brought out was we it came out last week. Pastor Henry Wright mentioned that the job description for a pastor is infinite. There's no
Sure. Yeah.
set structure. And I think part of the problem why some of pastors feel unfulfilled or can't fit into certain things is because we just don't know what to do as pastors. And when you find your niche, if it doesn't fit your leadership's perspective, you begin to get a lot of pushback or if it doesn't fit your churches, it begins to get a lot of pushback. I pastored a church, and it just hurt me just a couple of weeks ago, and I wanted to do a particular ministry. And because some of the members didn't like it, they went and told my administration, and they pushed back. And to this day, I still have some regrets that I wasn't bold enough to say, "Hey, we're going to move in this direction." I feel God's calling, and I think we're back to that sense of hearing what God is saying to you as a pastor, and being bold enough to say, "Hey, we're gonna do it because God is the one that's calling us." And
Can
I
I say
think that
something?
is key to what you all are saying here today.
Can I say something, Pastor Wade? You said something to me when I was making my transition that helped me. Um, my job before I ran summer camps, and when I was no longer youth director, you said run your own summer camp, and so I did, and I did it with my children, right? And then that kind of
Wow, good.
became the basis of me starting the camps to help kids start their businesses.
Mhm.
And what I
Wow.
believe for many pastors, maybe the answer to some of the frustrations of ministry is recognizing that the kingdom is so much bigger than the Adventist church. And some of the
Mm.
things that your church will not let you do or whatever, you got to do that thing in a way that blesses other people. Look at the stuff Rob just told us he did. Davis, I don't know if some of that stuff you may have been able to do. Maybe you could have, but I think the kingdom of God is so much better served for what you're doing now than if you were simply doing the old role that you were in. And that's no shade. Please don't take that as shade for anything. But I think if we recognize the kingdom is so much bigger than our church, we bless people like Pastor Davis. We say, man, this guy is doing what God is calling him to do, and people's lives are being impacted.
And the good thing I had going for me, just to address that one point, the good thing I had going for me in Baton Rouge is I had a church that said, "Hey, listen, we are not prepared to do any real work, but what we won't do is get in your way. And
Mm.
we'll also stand on the sideline and applaud you as you work yourself to an early grave." So that was a good thing I had. They said, "Hey, we won't jump in your way. Do whatever you want to do." And I did whatever I wanted to do, and had a good time doing it.
Listen, we got a comment in the chat here. Dr. Martin's asking a question. He's saying with the fading influence of the current cultural milieu, with the fading influence of pastors in society, would you advise? What would you advise the next generations, or would you advise the next generations to pursue pastoral ministry? So, in other words, with the fading influence of pastors in society, how would you advise the next generation to pursue pastoral ministry? What would you say to them?
Mine would be to the universities, as Oakwood being my heart. I'm an Oakwood man all the way through. But what I would say is that we take more of a approach to pastoral lead, or to ministry, as they take an approach to medicine. You study medicine, but no one says that you have to be a cardiologist, because pastoring is a
Oh,
very
wow.
specialized field.
Mm.
You go into pre-med, and then you go to med school, and then you go into your specialization. What we do is, as soon as you say, "I want to study medicine," we start saying, "Okay, great, you're going to be a cardiologist." That's exactly what I might want to do. Gynecology. I might want to do be a podiatrist. No, no, no. You only have one choice, one single solitary. And not only
Wow.
that, you have to be a cardiologist that works for Adventist Health Systems, and that's the only choice that you have. And I
Wow.
think if we step back and say, "Okay, you want to do ministry? Let's talk." I would love for them to have a couple of classes that talks about ministry in the real world, so that whether you are a physician, whether you're a sociologist, whether you are whatever, speech pathologist, whatever, this is how you are to take your profession and to do it and to make it into a
Mm.
ministry,
Mm.
whatever you're doing.
Mm.
Yeah.
And so that
Yeah.
people can see there are various options. And one of those options is cardiology. Out of all of them, one of those options is cardiology, not the
Mm.
end all be all.
Mm.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
then that's why you don't
Ah,
that's why
boy.
you don't hear neurologists bad mouthing cardiologists and saying that
Mm,
cardiologists are unneeded, because they respect what each other does, because they understand
that's
that
good.
all of
That's
us
good.
are practicing medicine.
Good
Yeah, that's
stuff.
good.
Good stuff.
That's good.
Good
Yeah,
stuff. I,
Yeah.
I
yeah, that's
think I
real good.
think you I think you hit it on the head there. Um, that has just exploded in my mind, this concept of ministry, and you know what thought comes to me. God's ways are higher than our ways. God's thoughts
Yeah,
are high,
yeah,
and
yeah.
we tend to kind of try to keep it in a certain way. But when He is outside of the box, we don't see it, we don't get it, we don't
Mm.
understand it.
Yeah.
Well,
You know, it's
that's a
so
no.
interesting. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, no, go ahead. I wanted to hear from you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think for people going into ministry, I would encourage them. Davis mentioned it, right? We need to have a better sense of helping all our members understand the calling from God. And I think for those who are looking at studying pastoral ministry, I would say be as sensitive to the voice of God all the way through your ministry. Because I think the move that we're seeing, I do believe it's God leading, and I think it's people now responding to that leading. And don't and be aware of what God is doing in you. There are some things that as you do your work of ministry, you'll see God is pulling me towards these people. God is pulling me towards this gifting. And I would say be faithful to what God is calling you to do, because when you serve doing what you're supposed to be doing, where you're supposed to be doing it, God's kingdom is best served that way. God's kingdom is best served that way.
Mm.
Wow. All right, gentlemen. So as we wrap this up today, our time got by real quick, it feels. So here we go. So let's go back to the question on the table, or the issue initially, that again we are looking. It seems that we're hearing again that we are going to be retiring more pastors than we are graduating. You guys heard that in the opening. So the it feels like we've got less and less young people who are have the desire to come and fill these denominational leadership positions, and that's including pastors and anything else. Is there any corrective action um, that you see the structure, the denomination, the church taking on that might turn that? Well, first of all, is that a bad thing? And if it is a bad thing, or whatever, however you feel about that, is there anything that you can think of that helps turn that around, where we can find more young people who see pastoring um, within denominational employ as something to pursue, as something that they want to do? Has pastoring
Mhm.
lost its the desire for folk to do it?
Yeah.
How would you address that? What would you say in terms of what can the church do to make sure that in 15, 20 years that there is leadership?
What if, are you ready for this? What if we just allowed things to play out its natural course, and I try to
Mm,
correct it? And what if we were to say that we're going to have, here's a number, 500. That just sounds like a good number. We're going to have 500 churches that will not have an employee of the conference called a pastor that will
ooh,
provide the weekly religious entertainment production. That we're
Mm,
going to allow congregations to develop an entirely new model of how they do ministry. What does an entirely new model of what it means for the saints to assemble, an entirely new model on what it means for to engage in ministry and to celebrate the Sabbath together. We're going to just allow these churches to come up with a whole new model. We're not going to force upon them one of our employees who will then tell them that this is the way you have to do it, which is, again, I keep using the term religious entertainment production with periodic community outreach activities. That's what church is right now. We can call it however, we can gussy it up how we want to,
mm,
but that's really what it
mm,
is. And so instead of doing that, we're going to say, you know what, congregation, you figure out how the Holy Spirit is leading. And it's going to look different in Corinth than it does at Philippi, than it does at Ephesus, but it's still going to have the same component: God's people building each other up and working together to engage in ministry. And how that looks is going to be different from city to city and from house to house, but y'all will figure it out. And we're not going to try to figure out a way to recruit
wow.
and to put this this model and impose this model, which is not a biblical model. The model that we use for our weekly assemblies is not biblical. It's one that we came up with. It is what it is. So
Okay.
if we can come up with this model, then churches can come up with another model, because the
Yeah.
purity is not in the model of how we assemble. It is in the doctrines that we believe. Do we still believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God? Do we still believe in the imminent return of Christ in the clouds of glory, and his commandments still being binding, and the Holy Spirit giving us power to keep those commandments? That's what's the essential. This other
Yeah.
stuff that we've made essential is actually not essential. So what if they don't come to fill these positions? In the words of Mahalia Jackson, let the church roll on.
Wow.
Listen,
Wow.
I think we need another show
Hey,
on just what,
yeah.
what
Yeah.
Pastor David
Hey,
said,
but
so we can
But
get into
before
it.
Kymone goes, let me throw this out here, because I want the audience to know, like, you've got people in this audience today, particularly Dr. Martin, who teaches preachers at the seminary. He teaches
Yes.
there, and he has just asked. I don't know if you guys saw it, but he has just asked for some suggestions from this audience to in response to this question as well. Um, and by the way, Dr. Davis, he said your stuff wasn't new. He said that sounds like the New Testament model. Anyway, all right, go on. Good stuff.
Dr.
Kymone.
Martin can never give me credit. Couldn't do it when I was a student. Won't do it now.
No, I think I can't differ much from what Davis just said, and I think it would be good if you guys post that in your group and people discuss it this week. That discussion.
Yes.
Davis is onto something. Our idea of what church is and how it functions is not the biblical model. And maybe what we're seeing, even though we bemoan it, we're losing pastors, this is happening. Maybe this is God's way of shifting us so that
Mm.
the church is becoming more of what it should have been. Sometimes we look at stuff and we say, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. And maybe God is saying, no, this is rain. This is rain here. So that what
Wow.
should be growing would grow, so that we stop having all of these spectators every week and we get more people off the bench into the game. And that's probably what is going to happen next, is the shift. And so, yeah, as David said, we could give some suggestions as to how to keep this model going, but maybe we see what is really God doing as he's shifting this stuff here.
Wow. Fascinating.
You
Wow,
know,
gentlemen, this has just been powerful. I'm looking
Yeah.
at the audience engagement. They
There's a
all
lot,
of us just
yeah.
really, glued in on this. Go ahead, Dr. Henry.
No, I was saying, listen, the audience are chiming in. They want to know more. Dr. Davis said that, or Dr. Martin said, you got the credit and graduate with flying colors, Dr. Davis. So he just want to just put it. But I'm sensing we got to do a show, gentlemen, later on sometime about the pastoral ministry. Is the pastoral ministry essential, or are we just seeing a shift that's going to continue, where the pastoral ministry is not as essential as it was before? We need to really get into that, because again, it's showing up in our schools why people are not going in. So I think we need to know, what's this pastoral ministry? Is it important? Is it still important? Do we need churches that will, I guess, shepherd themselves, and they don't need an overseer? Does the overseer need to be paid? Is it, let's get into it. And maybe that will be something that'll be effective.
Yeah. And by the way, I want to take a special time and shout out another pastor I see in the chat, Andre Campbell. Campbell, we should have and could have invited Andre to be on this discussion as well, because he's another pastor who was pastoring in denominational employ and felt the call of God to move out and launch out. And so Andre, drop some links or something in there so people can kind of get in touch with you and see what you are doing in the ministry that God has called you to at this time. And there may be others of you that are in a similar situation. We invite you to do the same.
And I wish that I could come one day and just tell you about the impact that the entire Campbell family has had on my life. I would not be the Robert Davis who's sitting here right now if it was not for Pastor Campbell and for his beautiful wife, Sister Campbell, who took me and mentored me and made me who I am. I got to say that. And I really appreciate seeing Andre here.
Yeah, good stuff. Good
Awesome,
stuff.
awesome, awesome. Listen, Dr. Davis, Pastor Hinds, or Kymone Hinds, we do see your ministry label underneath your name, but folks are asking how can they get in touch with you to gain. There was one of our viewers wanted you, Dr. Davis, to do a master class on how to make your ministry a community ministry. They want to know how to get in touch with you. Can you share how to do that for our viewers?
All of my social medias are SWG Unboxed. SWG, which stands for Seasoned with Grace, SWG Unboxed. And you can visit our website, which will tell you both about what we're doing with leaders as well as what we're doing with our community work. That website is www.swg-unboxed.org. That's swg-unboxed.org.
Excellent, excellent.
All right.
You should see that show up in your chat in just a second here for those of you that did not get it down quick enough. So we're hoping somebody type that up and throw that up in the chat.
Awesome. And my
And I'll put it in the guest chat for you.
To get in contact with me, my website is ideastolife.me, ideastolife.me. If you go there, there are places for scheduling a call. And I'll just give you my email address. It's my first name, Kymone, at ideastolife.me. So if someone could type that, put it in the chat, Kymone at ideastolife.me, ideastolife.me. And Kymone Hinds on any social media platform. So I'm the only person with this name. So
I love it.
Good stuff.
Love it. Love it.
That's good stuff, man.
Wow.
I just dropped my email and my website in the guest chat as well.
Okay. Got it. Got it. All right. Well, listen, we are so delighted and excited that you guys were willing to take the time to spend with us here at the PRT today. I guarantee you our audience was blessed, our live audience and our audience that will show up over the next few days are going to be richly edified by us, even by you guys being really even willing to breach the topic. We don't discuss it often. We don't discuss it a lot. And so we appreciate you guys being willing to come and put this on Front Street, as it were,
Right.
and really just kind of opening the box a little bit wider for people to be able to be encouraged and to see that ministry happens in more than just the classically defined places and spaces. So thank you so much. We applaud both of you for what you're doing. We applaud the courage that you engage by following where God was leading you. And thank you. But we want to say on behalf of our audience, on behalf of ourselves, thank you for showing us that you can move outside of the box, that you can find a way to minister in the specific ways that God is calling you at various seasons of your life and in your ministry. So thank you both so very much. We want to remind our audience that next month, September, we are not going to, what are we doing? Is the first two? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that's,
No,
we
no,
are
no,
good.
no. That's October. In September,
Yeah.
we are looking to do the
Right.
whole month
Whole
on
month.
religious liberty.
Religious liberty. And we're going to be talking about some fascinating things. Liberty of conscience. We're going to be talking about Christian nationalism. Some of these things that are coming to the forefront like we never would have imagined before. And so you want to make plans to be with us every single week through the month of September as we approach these topics on religious liberty. It used to be a thing that kind of sat on the back shelf and we didn't talk about it a lot. It just seemed like it was the, ultra conservative side of the church that always had something to say on these things. Look, y'all, we are seeing these things come front and center right now on CNN, MSNBC, Fox. You're seeing this stuff in your newspaper, on your social media feeds. So I guarantee you do not want to miss this month as we focus on this topic of religious liberty in all of its various ways. There is a thing that I wish we had the graphic to show you, but there's the religious council. What's that called? Conscience and Justice Council
Correct.
event that is coming up on the last week of September. We're going to put the flyer up in on our sites, on our platforms, to make sure that if you can be a part of that, to go ahead and do that. Some of you may be willing to go or interested in going. I believe it's out in California. Some of you may be able to watch it online. I think there is a registration fee, but we'll put all that information up. We want to promote that next month as well. Roger?
Yes. So to our guests, thank you for joining us today. To our viewers, thank you for being a part of this relevant discussion. You have, Dr. Davis, Pastor Hinds, you have demystified the concept that I don't pastor anymore. And you have actually given us an opportunity to celebrate with you what
That's
you're
right.
doing now. So thank you so
Yes.
much for allowing us, and thank you to our viewers for adding to this discussion. And thank you for supporting Pastors Roundtable, where we strive to make ministry relevant,
Resourced,
and real. God bless.
Goodbye, everyone. Stay with us, our guests.